Hi, I'm Jeff Bresee with CEI Engineering, and we're here to talk to you today, myself along with John Valastro, who I'll introduce in a minute, about the fundamentals of construction and the process and how it applies to athletic facilities. The title you can see is How to Get from A to E and Not Skipping the ones in the middle, B, C, and D. We'll talk about all these steps and the importance of them and hopefully help to guide you in the process you might be in with whatever sports facility you've got planned. Start off and I'll introduce this a little bit more. My name again, Jeff Bresee. I'm a civil engineer and I focus my practice on outdoor sports facilities, primarily synthetic turf fields, but lots of tracks, lots of tennis courts. It's kind of just expanded into everything, whether it be baseball, softball, soccer, field hockey, you name it, we've done it. We also do a lot of high performance grass fields and really anything outdoor sports, all the way through grandstands, press boxes, those kind of things. And in those kind of project capacities is where I met John Valastro. And John brings a very unique angle and perspective to our team because he's been an athletic director and a superintendent. John, why don't you introduce yourself?
Thanks, Jeff. Yeah, it's been exciting to work with Jeff. I am a retired athletic director and superintendent. I've had 32 years in education, and it's been neat to put all this together and maybe pass along some knowledge and perspective when it comes to construction projects. You know, as a superintendent, I always went in with the focus that I was going to use my coaching abilities, and I always wanted to make the best logical argument that we needed to have decent facilities, be it school or athletics. First, if we're going to have those participate in athletics, then we needed to have facilities that were safe and adequate. And so we had to make a commitment to doing that. You know, I always had experience in construction, but when it came to the finer parts of multi-million-dollar projects, I kind of found myself out of my league, and then that's where Jeff came in. We met about, 7 years ago, Jeff?
Oh, somewhere in there.
And once I convinced my school board that our facilities were inadequate, they gave me to go ahead, and things just took off from there with Jeff. We built a new field house. We added to our stadium. We added new press boxes, and we built an indoor practice multi-purpose facility. We added a turf, track, and a fine arts building. So over the years, we had quite a bit to do, and it was rewarding from the standpoint that Jeff was there every step of the way, and I kind of learned my limitations and leaned on Jeff, and Jeff brought expertise and knowledge and science. And so anytime I had a project, I knew that I needed an engineer, and Jeff was the guy for me. You know, as we get through this webinar, we're not going to be able to answer all your questions, but we hope that you will find some information that you can use and get back in touch with us, and we can share more information. For the sake of speed.
We're actually going to have a series of these. So today's going to be kind of kicking it off and talking about the overall picture of construction, and then dive into the first step. But yeah, John and I will be with you hopefully through multiples of these, and we think it'll just be very educational. We hope it is, to just be a guide, but along the way, please ask questions. Email us. We'll give our information at the end how you can contact us. I'm here today to help folks understand what the engineer does. When you contacted me years ago, it was just that you knew a lot. You know, it's not like you didn't know what you're doing, but there's some fine technical things that we can help all the way along in a process. So in checks and balances, you were the owner. You had the community with money and with need, and you knew what you wanted. And contractor, that tends to be pretty understandable. Somebody's going to build this thing. I think even I had to help you understand at the time what an engineer does, and that's actually pretty common. I find I have to do a little bit of educating on my own trade, but I don't mind doing that. And so today, that's what I wanted to kind of focus on is going over those roles. Number one, we talked about don't skip from A to E without going through B, C, and D. I want to kind of go over what all 5 of those steps are, and then just a little bit about how engineers help in those things. So you've got these phases that need to be gone through, it's helpful to have, and you can see what's the engineer's role here, helpful to have an unbiased expert who can guide you, knows as much, I guess, as as out there to be known, knows a lot, but also that unbiased is part of it, in that you don't have to worry if what they're telling you to do has maybe some kind of motive other than your own best interest in mind. And so that's why typically as engineers, we will work directly for the school as their consultant, so we can watch out for their interest all the way along the way. And that involves planning and budgeting, design, permitting, procurement assistance, and then construction management and observation, the construction process. Planning and budgeting, we're going to focus on most of today, and we're going to break these up into a series of webinars. There's not time for us to cover all this today, so we're going to cover today step A, and then later we'll cover B and C, and then later down the road we'll cover D and E. So be watching for it. We'll give more information on these webinars at the end. But planning and budgeting is so important. It's like the foundation for a building. It's like the foundation for anything. If it isn't done right, it's usually hard thereafter for it to be right, or you experience a lot of problems that could have been avoided. But we help with our knowledge right from the beginning, and I'll say it over and over and over. You can't get the expert, the engineer, involved too early, because the more you know, the earlier you know, the better it's going to be. If we do budgeting planning right, it will lead to a great design, cover everything we want, put it all on paper, and make sure the design's good, quality, budget friendly, budget conscious, and also built to last. It's going to lead us to permitting, and we'll talk a lot more about permitting in future webinars, because there's a lot to that. It used to be outdoor facilities, turf track, didn't go through a lot of permitting. That's quickly changing. We're starting to see more and more and more where the same process that every other construction process has to go through being permitted with the city is required of outdoor sports facilities. So what I mean by outdoor sports is primarily synthetic turf, high performance grass, tracks, tennis courts, baseball, softball. You'd be surprised what we're now having to do, especially in places like Austin, to get these things permitted. But it is doable, and an engineer is critical in that process. Procurement assistance is making sure you get the most of your money, get a very competitive bidding situation that gets you still quality contractor, but at the best price. And then construction is, of course, construction. There's just a lot you got to do in that process to make sure what you end up with is exactly what you planned on, what you drew up, and what you asked for. So the engineer has a lot to do. We certainly are involved from start to finish on projects routinely, and we're grateful we have the opportunity to be of value to a school. So as we move forward talking today, let's dive into planning and budgeting. And John, I'm going to let you talk a little bit about that first as we start the topic.
Us old coaches have to accept the fact that society is changing, and you may have a traditional district with a community that's tight-knit with little change over time. And these communities are vested in their schools. Athletic events are always the hub in which people socialize. Other districts are growing so rapidly up and down the interstate corridors across the state that they're doing everything in their power just to stay up. Our mobile society has families shopping around for districts who can meet their needs and their expectations. So you have to ask yourself, how are your facilities holding up? Do you have a plan? Planning can't be done overnight. Therefore, needs assessments are critical. Many districts have facilities that are past their life expectancy. Some facilities are even a hazard. There are other districts who, like I said, have grown several classification, are adding students and sports, which lends that their facilities are inadequate. Functionality is a word I use. I use this example when I talk about football stadiums. Back in the day, 15 to 18 times a year, you had an event on your field. Now you can have 60 to 75 events because we've added sub-varsity teams, boys and girls soccer, middle schools, 7th and 8th grade, A, B, C teams, and many communities want to use the facilities for their youth football. No natural turf can handle that amount of traffic. So we know that they're not functional. Tennis courts and tracks Jeff mentioned, sometimes they are built and left to fend for themselves for the next 20 or 30 years, and they just become unsafe, unusable. I know a district that I won't say their name, but they make their tennis players sign a waiver because their facilities are so bad and unsafe, but they have a good tennis program. You can't make students sign a waiver. That's just unacceptable. I know that some of you are feeling the pressure. Nearby districts are expanding and revitalizing their facilities, and you're kind of left behind trying to see what can you do to get new facilities. And finally, to do all of this in this needs assessment, you have to see ways that you can get enough support by your community. So I always say, what are you selling? What are you selling to your community? Sell the fact that you need these facilities, and if you show that they're unsafe and inadequate, maybe you'll get that support.
And I guess I'd say I like that last bullet there, community support. We want to lead up to that. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that. But before we do, I want to talk a little bit about planning from an engineering point of view. Do you have what it takes? Is oftentimes a lot of administrative stuff like John was talking about, but there's a lot that can come in from the engineering side that can make at least a big difference in what it is being planned and being budgeted. So we come in and help look at the more technical things, maybe sometimes as simple as the property right. Is there enough space? Is it geometrically going to work to do what all you want to do? Other things are things that are sometimes underground or less easy to see, whether it's a water table or subsoils or utilities, storm drain systems that maybe are not adequate, things like that. And then another thing that can come in there that, like we talked about earlier before, permitting, it's becoming more and more prevalent. We're going to, again, talk more about that in upcoming webinars, but permitting can dramatically affect what you're going to do, because sometimes cities say you just have to do it if you're going to be working in the community and making it work here. This all comes together into a concept site plan, and this is critical. It's a drawing that is concise. It's AutoCAD based, where we know things are going to work down to the square inch, you might say. But it's also helps everyone have a meeting of minds of what we're going to build, what's going to be done. Is it going to be functional? Is it going to have what we want it to have, do, and be? So once we have that concept site plan in place, we're really ready to proceed on. But at that time, you also need to discuss what you know and what you don't know. And here's where the unknowns come in. At the end of step A, again, there's still more steps to go. You can't know everything. We've got a lot of experience, and these jobs we've done in the past, nearly 300 of them, can help you know maybe what you don't know, what you can't know, and what you got to do to build in contingencies and backup plans about them. And therefore, as you move forward, even though you don't know them, you have a plan to deal for them once they become known, and how to handle them and make sure that there's enough to cover you either way. So engineers can make a big difference in this planning process from multiple ways, but mostly let's get the plan concise, something we can show. Remember, we talked about showing the community. We need something we can show them. But it's also something that helps us to know, well, now that we can see the picture, we know we got to build, we still got to do the budgeting. What's that gonna lead us to? John, I'll let you cover a little bit of that.
Well, there's always a limit on what you can spend in any project. And so it's very important that you ask yourself, are you trying to keep up with the Joneses, or are you trying to make sure that your district has adequate facilities? When you start envisioning the end product, you start adding bells and whistles that become very expensive. So you have to be smart about your planning and your budgeting. How are you going to pay for this? There are common funding routes. The most common one is bonding process. But there are districts that say, okay, we can't pass a bond, so let's look at our current budget, time warrants, tax notes or other means, fund balance designation, even community donations. Just a word of caution, don't get too excited about community donations. They usually have a lot of enthusiasm early, but as time goes on, they falter and you lose a lot of support. So just be careful. We can talk about funding options and funding routes at a later time. But here's the key. Don't go in there and say, hey, I need 1.5 million for a football field or a baseball field. You have to have some data. And again, this is where Jeff engineers are critical. These guys have, especially at CEI with our background on sports facilities, they have all the data. It's there for them to give you. So make sure when you go and you present yourself and your needs and your plans, always go in there with the data that will support what you're asking for.
Yeah, and I appreciate that, John. We do have a great deal of data, and I've learned over the many years it's all about the data when trying to gain community support. Well, and the pretty pictures that we draw too, but that's part of the data. Best way to do it is to show them. Everyone wants to kind of see. I've been doing this for many years, and the primary one, the example I'm going to use here is, I guess we call it the classic one, turf versus grass. As this new synthetic turf came on the market, everyone wanted it, but a lot of them didn't feel they could get it, didn't have the community support. But little by little, folks started putting them in. How did they do it? Was it frivolous? No. And we've been helping schools all along the way and doing these comparisons to help them show that it's not. Classically, when someone goes and says, Jeff, we want to compare our stadium grass field to putting in turf, how do we do this? They'll say to me, well, heck, we only spend $20,000, $30,000 on the field. And I have to say, well, we can't compare a synthetic field to that field, because that field, the reason I'm here is it's got big bare spots on it and unsafe spots, and it's uneven and it's in disrepair. It's not a fair comparison. If you want a quality stadium or any kind of grass sports field, you have to have something that's safe and can take a lot of traffic. And topsoil normal grass fields just can't. High performance grass fields can. And that means sand-based grass. This is an example from West Sabine, most recent one I've done. So I use them as an example here. And we looked at taking their old grass field, turn it into a new high-performance grass field and a new synthetic turf field. What are all the costs of that? What are all the costs over 10-year life cycles? Turf, or these fields last about the same life cycle, about 10 years if you're going to put a lot of traffic on them and keep them nice. So it all adds up that if you put the construction cost and the maintenance cost and look out over a 20-year couple life cycles, it's a break-even situation. So then if that's the case, which by the way is almost always the case with this comparison when I do it for schools, it then becomes the comparison of other things. I didn't break all the details we normally do on these other topics, but in our reports we go into each of these categories in detail and show where the advantages lie. And as you can see, most of them lie with synthetic turf, and therefore the justification behind what we're actually seeing of so many fields going to synthetic turf. And with that data, you present it in time after time after time, folks are able to get behind it and support it. So we'd love to do this for you. This is something I'll break right here and say phase A, I guess you call it, this budgeting, planning and budgeting phase. This is something we do for schools without any charge. We hope to help a school get the project off the ground so that when it becomes a project, we can be on the team, and that's how that's our business, is being the engineer on the project. We understand it's not a project unless it's a project, and we understand that that help is needed, so we're going to offer that. That means a concept site plan, an engineer's preliminary cost estimate, and a report to help go along, providing you all the data. Usually a good idea, doesn't happen all the time, but a lot of times schools will have us wrap all that up at the end and come to a school board meeting and present it as an information item, and then the community is able to start the conversation without the board having to make any votes or judgments on it at that time. So again, love to make that available to you. Before we kind of wrap it up, I also want to go over some example projects, just a little bit of how engineers can make a difference. These are recent projects where I thought we were able to make a big difference. We always make a big difference, but sometimes it's a little more evident than others. So I chose these two projects. Rockwall School District had in their bond for Rockwall High School to build a baseball and a softball practice field. They were out of capacity at their stadium. By the time they passed the bond and time moved on to where they were going to build it, the real estate had gone up and the real estate wasn't available, and other issues where they were not able to do what they wanted to do, build a grass baseball and softball field somewhere else and off campus, and keep it in the budget or even anywhere close to it. we were able to come in and say, well, let's look at what we do have. There's one little field left. We use it for a lot of stuff. We really can't lose it to this, but could it all be used for the same purpose using synthetic turf? Well, the durability of turf made it possible, but they were boxed in by businesses, car dealerships, you name it. They needed netting up all the way around it, so it starts to drive the price back up to make it work. And by the time we said we also got to do this at night, well, those lights were going to get us back to where we were, just pushing the budget, or at least uncomfortable. And so in trying to solve some problems, we were able to do multiple things there. But the main thing was we worked with the lighting company and the netting company to combine the two, which had never been done before. Long story, but it's just because of new technologies and new things and a little bit of getting people to consider what maybe they hadn't done in the past. We now have this facility at Rockwall. Immense service to them. They play all the sports you can see there: soccer, football, baseball, softball, and even the discus. And we're able to maximize the dollar, stay within their budget, and meet the needs of a lot of kids, a lot of folks, and stay in budget. So just an example of helping to bring a lot of knowledge and data and know-how and I guess connections, whatever it might be, to solve some problems. The other is a more classic problem, although that one I guess could be applied anywhere. But this is the issue of a foundation where you've got to make sure your field is on a great foundation, a great base. If it's not, it will never be right. And even if you build one to begin with, if you lose it, well, then you're going to lose the field. And it comes into groundwater and flooding and storm drain and stuff like that. Vidor hired us to design their stadium because they'd been flooded and underwater by Harvey, and they had a high water table. And they knew that we had helped a lot of universities in Louisiana, primarily some stuff after Hurricane Katrina, where we came up with a new design for fields. The standard design for a synthetic turf field is to put a pond liner, a welded pond liner underneath these fields, with the idea that we'll dry the soil out, compact it, and keep the water from ever getting to it. What that design misses is, well, what happens if the water comes from up underneath, the groundwater, or even spring water, or who knows, all these different ways water can get up underneath there. So you got to be careful how you do this. I'm not saying that design can't work, but you really have to consider the situation you put it down, because if you miss, the water gets under that liner, it's trapped forever, you got a soft base, there's really nothing you can do but tear the field apart and redo it. And you absolutely don't want that after putting so much money into it in the first place. So in Vidor, we did all of this for them, and I didn't know this was going to happen, but after we did the structural base for them, we solved a lot of groundwater problems for them. We made sure that it had a geotextile. Key to this system that we use is making a breathable system with a fabric instead of a liner. We even designed the turf to be a little different to survive underwater. Handed them the finished project, and we hoped it really wouldn't ever be needed. You never want something like that to happen. But Imelda struck 3 days after they got their substantial completion, and you can see it left them underwater one more time. This is even actually the day after these pictures from the hurricane. Water still in the whole community. But 1 day later, they were back to having no water there and only little skiffs of rubber down the side, which for a brand new field, that's pretty typical anyway. So they had no damage to the field, took an hour's worth of grooming, and they were back as if it never happened. So it made a big difference to them. We're able to give them something they can feel good about in that area, because you never know that we keep getting things like this. We hope they never need it again, but they can rest assured that they're covered if it happens. Along the coast, flood-prone areas, even mountainous or hilly country where you can get springs. There's a lot of situations you need to consider this, and something we could help you look into and help you know even whether it's something you need to look into. So a couple examples. That's really what I wanted to talk about today. And I guess we'll just go back to the invite. We'd love to answer your questions. We'd love for you to contact us, email us, whatever you need. If you want us to stop by, let us do so, or whatever you think we can do to help you. And please be looking forward to webinars to come. We're going to be in the e-newsletter for the athletic directors here in the next few sections with our others, so keep your eye out for it. John, you got any closing words for us before we wrap it up?
Just that, if you are having some difficulty on trying to figure out how budgeting and planning from an administrative standpoint any questions, feel free to contact me. There's my number and my email. Anything technical or engineer purpose-wise, land, facilities. Jeff is really good about getting on the road. He traveled all over the state of Texas, and so he will make himself available. So like I said, and like Jeff said, we look forward to these next few webinars. I hope you will join us. But if you have any questions at any time, please feel free to contact us.
All right. We'll talk to everybody next week. See you later.